I remember the cold slap of the floor more than the fall itself. One second I was holding a basket of clean towels, the next I was tumbling down the stairs like a rag doll. My ankle twisted hard, my hip hit the third step. I let out a sharp cry, half pain, half fear. I lay there, stunned, breath caught in my chest, pain radiating up my leg. Then I heard it. Laughter, light, casual. From the top of the stairs, my son, Travis, stood holding a soda and his phone, still in his work clothes. He looked down at me, not with concern, not with panic, but with a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Geez, Mom," he said, chuckling. "You okay? That was like something out of a cartoon." I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. Not because of the pain, but because something inside me broke that wasn't physical. I watched him walk away to the kitchen without even offering me a hand. That night, I limped to bed in silence. Every muscle in my body ached, but nothing hurt more than how easily he dismissed me. Around 11:30, there was a knock on my door. "Hey," Travis said, stepping halfway into the room. "Sorry about earlier. I was just caught off guard, you know? Anyway, I need a favor. I'm short on rent this month. Can you spot me 10 grand? My eyes met his. His tone was casual, like it was nothing, like I wasn't still swollen and bruised from that staircase. I said nothing, just stared at him. The next morning, I handed him an envelope. "What's this?" he asked. He opened it, read the first line, froze. Inside was a lawsuit, filed in my name, against him, for emotional distress, financial manipulation, elder abuse. He looked at me with wide eyes like I was someone he didn't recognize. And maybe I wasn't, not anymore. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Before everything changed, my life was quiet, predictable, steady. I liked it that way. I used to wake up every morning at 6:30 without an alarm. The light would filter through the kitchen blinds, and I'd start the day with a pot of coffee and the local paper. No noise, no chaos, just me, the birds, and the warmth of the morning sun against my kitchen tiles. I didn't need much. I never have. My name is Lorraine Maddox. I'm 62 years old, and I raised my son, Travis, alone. My husband, Jacob, passed away when Travis was just 9. Colon cancer. It took him fast, faster than anyone could prepare for. One day, he had a mild stomachache. The next, we were talking to hospice nurses about how much time he had left. When he died, everything about our home felt too big. The hallways echoed. The nights stretched too long. But I never let Travis feel that heaviness. I refused. I worked 2 jobs, physical therapy at the clinic during the day and private patients in the evenings. I'd come home sore, my back tight, hands aching from lifting patients twice my size. Still, I made time to sit with Travis for dinner, always. We used to play a game where we'd go back and forth sharing one thing we were grateful for. Sometimes he said pizza. Sometimes he said, "You, Mom." That alone could carry me for days. Our little house wasn't fancy, but I made it warm. There were pictures on every wall, vacations we couldn't afford but made happen anyway, birthday parties, one of Travis and I at the zoo, both wearing matching baseball caps. Every corner held a memory I was proud of. I never took up hobbies or traveled much. My joy came from seeing my son thrive. I used to believe that if I gave Travis everything I could, he'd always feel that love, that safety. He'd remember who stood by him. He'd never forget. Even in his teens, when he started pulling away Dot as all boys do, I made excuses for the distance. He's just figuring himself out, I'd tell myself. When he stopped hugging me goodnight, I told myself it was hormones. When he started staying over at friends' houses more often than his own, I said, "He's being independent, that's good." The first time he ever asked me for money, he was 19. Just $200 to fix his car. I gave it to him without hesitation. And the second time, and the third, and the 10th. But it never felt like a burden. It felt like parenting. It felt like love. After he got his first real job, I remember crying in the parking lot. Not because I was sad, because I was so proud. He had on a new suit we picked out together, and when he got the offer letter, he hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs might crack. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom," he whispered. That moment meant more to me than any paycheck I'd ever earned. When he moved into his own apartment, I helped furnish it. Gave him my best frying pan, my spare towels, a set of dishes I'd saved since my wedding. "It's just stuff," I told him. "You're what matters." Even as the years passed and he visited less, I kept my faith in that bond. I baked his favorite muffins on his birthday, mailed care packages, and texted him those silly motherly check-ins. "Did you eat? Remember to breathe today," he often answered with one-word replies. Sometimes he didn't respond at all. Still, I convinced myself it was normal, that I had done well, that Travis was a good son, a busy son maybe, but a good one. The truth is, I wrapped my identity so tightly around being a mother that I forgot to notice when that title stopped holding meaning in his eyes. I mistook my sacrifice for security. I thought love was a shield, a guarantee, but it wasn't. Looking back, there were small moments, things I didn't want to see that suggested something was shifting, a tone, a glance, a joke at my expense. I ignored them because I loved him, because I believed he loved me. I had no idea how wrong I was. It was such a small thing, barely a moment, really, the kind of thing most people would brush off, and I did, at the time. It was a Saturday morning and Travis had come over for brunch. I had woken up early, made banana pancakes from scratch, the kind with walnuts in them, just how he liked them as a boy. I even brewed his favorite coffee blend, a hazelnut roast I had to drive an extra 30 minutes to get because our local store had stopped stocking it. When he walked in, he barely looked up from his phone. "Hey," he mumbled, half distracted, his fingers flying over the screen as he flopped onto the couch. I smiled and kept flipping the pancakes. When I called him to the table, he took his time. Then, as I sat across from him and started asking about work, he interrupted with a smirk and said, "You know, you really need to stop believing everything you read online. That article you sent me about savings accounts, pretty outdated." I blinked. It wasn't the words that hit me. It was the tone. Sharp, slightly condescending, laced with a chuckle like he thought I was slow, stupid even. I laughed it off. "Well, I thought it had some good points," he shrugged. "It's cute that you try to keep up." That word. Cute. Like I was some bumbling old woman struggling to understand the basics of life in a world that had moved past her. Still, I let it go. I smiled and said, "Maybe I'll just let you manage my money from now on, trying to keep things light." I thought we were joking, that's what I told myself. But the rest of breakfast felt different. He didn't ask me about my week. He scrolled through his phone between bites. When he finished eating, he stood, kissed my forehead absently and said, "Thanks for breakfast, Mom. You're the best," before heading out the door with barely a glance. I washed the dishes alone. The syrup on his plate had hardened into a sticky smear. I scrubbed harder than I needed to. That night, as I sat in my recliner watching old reruns, the moment kept replaying in my head. The smirk, the word cute, the dismissal. I told myself I was being sensitive, that I was tired, that I was reading too much into it, but something about it lingered. The next morning, I needed help setting up a new online account for my retirement benefits. I called Travis, figuring he could walk me through it. When he picked up, he sounded annoyed. "Can't you just YouTube it, Mom?" he asked. I hesitated. I tried. I just got confused with the login steps. "I'll swing by later," he cut me off. "I've got stuff to do." He didn't come by that day, or the next. 3 days later, he texted me a video link. No message, just the link. It felt cold, dismissive, like I was a burden, like helping me had dropped to the bottom of his list. But again, I made excuses. He's busy. He's tired. That's just how young people communicate now. He loves me. He's just stressed. The job, the commute, the pressure. I blamed everything but him. I had spent so many years being the strong one, the dependable one, that the idea of my son treating me like a nuisance was something I couldn't even begin to process. And yet that voice inside me, quiet, steady, was starting to whisper that something had shifted, that this wasn't just a phase, that I was no longer seen as a mother. I was starting to feel more like a background character in his life, someone to be checked on, tolerated, and occasionally used. Still, I didn't confront him. I didn't bring it up. I didn't want to ruin what little closeness we had left. So I folded the doubt deep inside me, buried it under the weight of years of love and sacrifice. After all, it was just one comment, just one, but it was the beginning. It didn't happen all at once. There was no single explosion, no screaming match, no slamming of doors. That would have been easier in a strange way, more obvious. But what happened between Travis and me was quieter, slower. Like a slow leak in a tire dot, you don't notice it until you're stranded somewhere, wondering how you got there. I started to feel it in the silences. There was a time when Travis used to call just to tell me about his day, the small stuff, a promotion at work, a funny thing his boss said, a bad date. He used to care what I thought. Now, days would go by without a single word. When I'd text to check in, I often got replies like, "Busy, I'll call later." But later rarely came. One evening, I called him after watching the news. There had been a bad storm near his apartment complex, and I just wanted to make sure he was okay. When he picked up, I could hear people laughing in the background, glasses clinking. "Mom, I'm out," he said. "Can this wait?" I paused. "I just saw the storm. Wanted to know if you were safe." He sighed. "I'm fine. You don't have to check on me every time it rains, seriously." Then he hung up. I stood in the kitchen with the phone still pressed to my ear long after the call ended. Something about his tone. It wasn't frustration, it was dismissal. Like I was foolish for worrying, like my care had become an inconvenience. And that wasn't the last time. He stopped asking me to come to his office holiday parties, said they were more for coworkers or not really my scene. But I saw photos later he brought a friend, another guy from work. I wasn't hurt that I didn't go. I was hurt he didn't even think I'd want to. He used to ask for my advice about everything, whether to lease or buy, how to cook something, what kind of insurance made the most sense. Now, whenever I offered a suggestion, he brushed it off with a short, "Yeah, I'll figure it out." Once he was over for dinner and I mentioned a book I had just finished, one I thought he'd love. He smiled thinly and said, "I don't really read books anymore. Podcasts are more efficient." Efficient. I felt like I was being measured in terms of efficiency too. Like I'd been demoted in his life. No longer someone to turn to, just someone to tolerate, a relic of his past. He started showing up only when he needed something. Borrowing tools, printing documents, needing a favor. And when he did come, he rarely stayed longer than 10 or 15 minutes. I remember one Sunday when he arrived unexpectedly. For a brief moment, my heart leapt. I thought maybe he missed me. But no. He had just locked himself out of his apartment and wanted to borrow the spare key I kept for emergencies. I handed it to him. He didn't even take off his jacket. He said thanks, turned, and left. No hug, no conversation, nothing. After he left, I sat on the couch and stared at the door. It was the absence that hurt the most. The absence of warmth, the absence of curiosity, the absence of love that used to flow so freely between us. I used to believe that love was something that couldn't disappear, not between a mother and her only child. But now, I felt like I was being slowly erased. Not with cruelty, but with neglect, a kind of quiet forgetting, like I was fading into the background of his life, and he didn't even notice. I stopped suggesting lunch dates. I stopped asking questions he didn't want to answer. I started carrying groceries alone again. I stopped reaching out first. And as I pulled back, I realized something else. He didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, he didn't care. That was when I knew something deeper was broken. Not a crack, a fracture. One I hadn't caused. One he wasn't trying to fix. It happened on a Tuesday evening. I had just come home from the grocery store, my arms sore from carrying everything up the porch steps. I was proud that I still did things myself. I moved a little slower these days, sure, but I stayed active, independent. I liked it that way. Travis had let himself in earlier using his spare key. He'd texted, saying he needed to use the printer and grab a few things from the attic. I told him, of course. It was still his home in many ways. I stepped inside, balancing the grocery bags against my hip, and called out, "Travis, you still here?" "Upstairs," he shouted back. I moved toward the stairs, still in my coat, planning to set the bags down first. But then I noticed one had split slightly on the bottom. A carton of eggs was starting to slip through the tear, so I rushed. Too fast. My heel caught the edge of the third step, and before I could grab the rail, I slipped. The sound of my body hitting the stairs, shoulder, hip, then knee, was louder than I'd imagined it would be. It knocked the wind out of me. I let out a sharp gasp, the pain blooming across my back and thigh, and then everything was still for a second. I looked up, dazed, and there he was. Travis stood at the top of the staircase, holding a shoebox in one hand and his phone in the other. He didn't move. He just looked at me for a moment. Then he gave a short laugh, a real laugh. Not nervous or shocked, but amused. "Damn, Mom," he said. "That looked like it hurt." I couldn't speak. It wasn't just the pain, it was the look on his face. Not concern, not alarm, not even mild surprise. Just irritation. Like I'd interrupted his day with my clumsiness, like I was the punchline of some joke he was about to share in a group chat. He didn't rush down to help. He didn't ask if I could move. He didn't even put the shoebox down. He stood there for a beat longer, then added, "You okay? Or you just gonna lie there all dramatic?" That was when something in me snapped. Not out loud, not in front of him, but deep inside. Something cracked. Still, I nodded and said, "I'm fine," even as tears stung the corners of my eyes and my hip throbbed in protest. I pulled myself up slowly, clinging to the rail, biting the inside of my cheek so I wouldn't cry in front of him. Travis was already walking away. "Try not to sue me," he called over his shoulder with a laugh, and I heard the front door open and shut. I stood there, halfway up the stairs, holding onto the railing with both hands. My body hurt, but not as much as my pride. I'd raised this boy, loved him, poured my soul into him, and now at 62 I was humiliated in my own home, mocked while lying on the floor like a broken thing. I limped into the kitchen and stared at the groceries still strewn across the floor. A dozen eggs cracked. The milk jug had burst and was leaking slowly into the tile grout. I didn't clean it right away. I sat down in one of the kitchen chairs, my body aching, and stared at the mess. It was like my life in that moment, cracked, leaking, and no one coming to help. It wasn't just that he laughed, it was what that laugh represented. A total absence of empathy, a complete lack of respect. I had become a joke to him. Not a mother, not even a person. She's someone who fell down the stairs. And the worst part was, it didn't surprise me. Not really, because deep down, I'd been falling for a long time. That night, I cleaned up the mess. Took some painkillers. I didn't call Travis, didn't ask why he said what he did, but something had shifted. And this time, I wasn't going to ignore it. After the fall, everything changed. Not for Travis. For him, life moved on like nothing happened. He didn't call the next day. Didn't check if I was sore or bruised. He didn't even ask if I needed help replacing the eggs and milk. It was as if I had become invisible in my own home. But something in me went quiet after that day. So quiet I could almost hear myself breathing when I walked from room to room. It wasn't anger. That would have been easier. Anger demands a confrontation. It wants a fight, a raised voice, some slamming of doors. But what I felt wasn't loud. It was a kind of silence that comes when you finally stop hoping. A stillness that settles into your bones when you realize you've been standing in a burning room for years and only just now noticed the smoke. I didn't tell Travis to stay away. I just stopped inviting him. I stopped baking his favorite meals on Sundays. I stopped texting him reminders to get enough rest or checking in when the weather turned bad. I took down the calendar where I'd written the dates of his work trips, his birthdays, his dentist appointments. I left it blank. And the funny thing was, he didn't notice. That told me more than any words ever could. About a week after the fall, he texted me, "Coming by tonight to do laundry. Need quarters." Not, "How are you?" Not, "Can I bring anything?" Just that. A request. As usual. I stared at the message for a long time, then put my phone face down on the table and left it there. I didn't reply. That evening, I left the porch light off. I turned the lock on the laundry room door. I turned off the hallway lights and went to bed early. I wasn't hiding. I just didn't want to make it easier for him to walk into my space like it didn't belong to me. The next morning, I found a note wedged under the door. Did you forget I was coming? Need those quarters. Laundry's piling up. No apology, no concern, just another demand. That was when I decided. I wasn't going to explain myself anymore. I wasn't going to perform the role of the forever available, ever sacrificing mother. I had played that part for decades, and it had gotten me laughed at, ignored, and left bleeding on my staircase. So I started making quiet changes. I canceled the spare key he used to get in. I called the locksmith and had the locks changed the next day. When Travis noticed, he sent a short message. "Did you change the locks?" I replied with one word, "Yes." He never asked why. He just said, "K." Not long after that, he stopped coming by altogether. I think he was waiting for me to miss him, to reach out, to fall back into old patterns. But I didn't. Instead, I started spending my mornings differently. I sat in the garden more. I joined a local book club, something I had always meant to do but never found time for because I was too busy making myself available to Travis. I didn't walk away from him in a storm of emotions. I didn't slam any metaphorical doors. I just stopped trying. I stopped fighting for a relationship that I seemed to care about more than he ever did. It felt like shedding an old coat, one that used to keep me warm but had gotten too heavy with time, too worn, too burdened with disappointment. People around me began to notice. My friend Martha from church said, "You've been quiet lately, not your usual spark." And she was right. I had been quiet, but not because I was sad. I was listening to the silence Travis had left behind, and realizing it was more peaceful than the noise he used to bring. I had always thought a mother never walks away from her child, but now I understood there was another side to that truth. Sometimes a mother walks away, not because she stops loving her child, but because she finally starts loving herself. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't show up in photos, not the kind you post about on Facebook or the kind that gets sympathy texts. It's the kind that creeps into your bones when your house is quiet, too quiet, and the silence starts to feel like company. That's where I found myself in the weeks after I locked Travis out. I had spent so much of my adult life giving love, giving time, giving forgiveness without asking for any in return. I didn't know who I was without someone to take care of, and now that Travis was gone, I felt like a house stripped of its furniture, standing, still whole, but empty. The physical pain from the fall eventually faded, but my body still ached in ways that had nothing to do with the bruises. I'd wake up sore, my joints stiff, my back tight from sleeping in one position too long because, truth be told, I didn't sleep well anymore. There were days I didn't bother changing out of my nightgown. I'd make coffee, pour it into a mug, then forget it in the microwave. I'd sit by the window with a blanket over my lap and stare at the bird feeder in the backyard. One morning, I watched a robin build a nest in the corner of the fence. Piece by piece, she gathered twigs and leaves, tucking them into place with such care. She flew back and forth for over an hour, and I sat there the whole time, watching, tears rolling down my cheeks for reasons I couldn't explain. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was realizing I had spent my whole life building my own kind of nest for someone who had long since flown away. It wasn't just Travis I missed. It was the idea of him. The boy who used to bring me dandelions. The teenager who once spent an entire Saturday repainting the garage just because I mentioned it looked dingy. Where had that boy gone? And what had I become without him? One night, I stood in front of the hallway mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back at me. My hair, once so carefully styled every morning, now hung in flat wisps. The laugh lines around my eyes seemed deeper, not from joy, but from squinting through pain. My posture had changed too. My shoulders slightly slumped, as if my very body was trying to fold in on itself. I went to the cabinet and pulled out a small box where I kept keepsakes. Old cards, notes from Travis when he was a child. I found a crayon drawing, crooked and bright. Stick figures of him and me, a blue sky, a red sun. The words written in messy block letters. Me and Mom, the best team. I pressed the paper to my chest and sobbed. Not pretty tears. Not movie scene tears, the kind that come from your gut, that curl you inward, that leave you heaving for air. That night, I didn't eat dinner. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't read. I just sat in the dark and listened to the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the house settling. And for the first time in a long time, I thought, what if I've wasted it all? My energy, my youth, my heart. I had poured it all into a son who no longer saw me as anything more than a bank account and an occasional burden. And I had nothing left. No one came by, no one called. The phone stayed silent. I went to bed cold that night. I didn't bother turning on the heat, didn't draw the curtains, just slid under the blanket and stared at the ceiling until my eyes burned. That was my bottom. Not some dramatic moment, not a collapse in a hospital or on a sidewalk, just a quiet, aching realization that I was more alone than I'd ever been. Not because no one was around, but because the one person I loved most had stopped seeing me a long time ago, and somehow I had let him. It started with a drawer I hadn't opened in years. I was looking for a heating pad, something to soothe the stubborn pain in my lower back that had lingered since the fall. I reached into the sideboard in the hallway, the one Jacob used to call the black hole because everything ended up in there. Manuals for appliances we no longer owned, old receipts, expired coupons, bits of ribbon I couldn't bear to throw away. I didn't find the heating pad, but what I did find stopped me cold. Tucked beneath a tattered folder of home warranty papers was a manila envelope with Jacob's handwriting on it. His script was unmistakable, neat, slanted slightly to the right with a little curl at the tail of every Y. The envelope read, "For Lorraine, if anything happens." I sat down on the floor, right there in the hallway, and held the envelope in my lap for a moment before opening it. My hands trembled. Inside, I found a series of documents. Some I remembered vaguely, our will, property title, insurance forms, but one stood out. It was a letter, typed, 2 pages, signed and dated 8 months before Jacob passed. "Lorraine," it began. "If you're reading this, it means something's happened, and I'm not here to help carry the load. And that breaks my heart." Tears stung my eyes immediately. I hadn't seen his handwriting in over 20 years, not like this, not personal, not speaking directly to me. "You've always been the strong one, the quiet warrior. I've watched you put everyone before yourself. If I'm gone, I need you to promise me one thing. Protect your heart. Don't let anyone take advantage of your kindness, not friends, not family, not even our son." My breath caught. I read it again. Not even our son. Jacob had seen it coming. Even back then when Travis was still a boy, he must have seen the signs I was too blinded by love to notice. The letter went on, "Travis is smart, but he's not grounded. He leans on you too much, and I worry that if I'm not there, he'll see you not as his mother, but as a safety net. And you'll let him, because that's who you are. But don't. Not if it starts to hurt. Not if it costs you your peace." The rest of the letter detailed suggestions, gentle guidance. Jacob reminded me that the house was in my name alone, a protection we'd made after refinancing, that the accounts were secured, that I had power of attorney if anything ever came up with Travis. I was crying by the end. Not sobbing like I had the night before, but slow, steady tears, a quiet ache moving through me. It was like Jacob was speaking to me from beyond the grave, handing me a flashlight just as I'd gotten lost in the darkest part of the forest. But it wasn't just the letter that shook me. It was what it forced me to face. I went back to the drawer and dug deeper. I pulled out bank statements, copies of checks I'd written to Travis over the years, rent, repairs, short-term loans that had never been paid back, thousands of dollars, all in my handwriting, all given without hesitation. Then I opened my laptop and searched for the emails Travis had sent, the ones where he guilted me, manipulated me. "I thought you said you'd always be there. I hate having to ask, but you know I wouldn't if it weren't serious. I just need help this once." Except it was never just once. I printed them out, stacked them, sat back on the couch and stared at the growing pile. For the first time, I saw the whole picture. I wasn't just being taken for granted. I was being used. by my own son. And suddenly, all the little dismissive comments, the laughter on the stairs, the indifference, they all snapped into focus like puzzle pieces falling into place. It wasn't personal affection that kept him around. It was convenience. And that realization didn't just hurt. It shifted something in me. I didn't feel sorry for myself. I felt awake. Like I'd finally opened my eyes after years of being half asleep. Jacob had tried to prepare me, and now, even from beyond the veil of time, he had given me what I needed. Not just permission, but a plan. It was time to stop surviving in the background of my own life. It was time to stand up. Something shifted inside me that day. It wasn't dramatic, not some fiery burst of anger or a sudden, life-altering decision. No, it was quieter than that. Like a light being turned on in a room I'd been sitting in for years, completely unaware I was in the dark. I sat on the couch with Jacob's letter on my lap and a growing pile of printed emails and bank records on the table in front of me. My house, which had felt so empty just a day ago, now felt full of truth, full of clarity, full of something I hadn't felt in a long, long time: control. I had spent so many years trying to be gentle, forgiving, understanding. I thought that's what made a good mother. I thought that biting my tongue, keeping the peace, and giving without limit was a sign of love. But now I saw it differently. I had trained Travis to believe that no matter how poorly he treated me, I would always be there, always give, always smile and say, "It's okay." And he had grown into that belief like it was his birthright. But Jacob's words had unlocked something, a memory of who I used to be. Before motherhood, I was sharp, driven. I put myself through school while working part-time and caring for my parents. I had opinions, boundaries, pride. I hadn't lost those things. They'd just been buried beneath years of pouring everything into someone else. I stood up, slowly, as if testing new legs. My back still hurt, but there was something different in the way I carried myself. I moved through the house like it belonged to me again. I walked into the bedroom, pulled out my old filing box, and began organizing the evidence. Receipts, loan requests, printed messages, notes I had jotted down. Every moment of disrespect, every broken promise, every bruise that wasn't on my skin, but on my spirit. And as I worked, something strange happened. I didn't cry, not once. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt calm. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't check if Travis had texted. I didn't care. I made myself breakfast. Not a rushed slice of toast or coffee from a paper cup. A real breakfast. Scrambled eggs, sautéed spinach, fresh orange juice. I sat by the window and watched the sunrise while I ate. And I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd done something just for me. That day, I walked to the bookstore downtown. There's a little place tucked between a flower shop and a bakery, family-owned, full of creaky wooden floors and the smell of old paper. I used to go there all the time when Travis was young. I'd read while he played with building blocks in the children's corner. I hadn't been back in over a decade. The owner, Camille, recognized me. Her hair was gray now, and her reading glasses hung from a cord around her neck. "Lorraine," she said, smiling. "It's been years." "I know," I said. "I forgot how much I missed this place." We talked for nearly an hour. I told her about Jacob, about how I'd taken time away from everything. She didn't pry, just listened. And then, before I left, she said something that stopped me in my tracks. "You look like someone who's starting over. That's not easy at our age, but it's brave." Brave. That word stayed with me the entire walk home. I wasn't just waking up, I was rebuilding. Not for revenge, not for drama, but for dignity, for peace. When I got home, I sat down at the kitchen table and opened a blank notebook. On the first page, I wrote just 3 words in big black ink. "This ends now." And under that, I wrote a list. Not of revenge, not of ways to hurt Travis, but of what I needed to reclaim. My voice, my space, my financial security, my self-respect. I didn't know exactly what the next step would be, but I knew I wasn't going to keep pretending. I wasn't going to keep bleeding quietly while calling it love. Something inside me had been asleep. And now, It was awake. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not Travis. Not my friends from church. Not even Martha, who always seemed to know when something was going on with me before I did. This was mine. This quiet plan. This quiet shift. I started small. I pulled out all my financial records, bank statements, loan agreements, even old Venmo screenshots. I made copies of everything and organized them by year. As I built the file, it stunned me how much I had given to Travis over the years, how casual I'd been about handing over money. 200 here, 500 there, thousands with a simple, trusting, "Don't worry about it, honey." I added up the total one night. The number made my stomach turn. Not because of the money itself, but because of what it represented. All the times I was taken advantage of. All the times I was too afraid to say no. All the times I believed love was about saying yes. That same week, I scheduled an appointment with an attorney named Miriam Holt. She came highly recommended by a woman in my book club who had gone through something similar with her adult daughter. Miriam was calm, clear-eyed, and didn't talk down to me. That mattered more than I realized. "I've been documenting everything," I told her. She nodded. "Good. This isn't about punishing your son. This is about protecting yourself." She walked me through my legal options, how to pursue a claim for elder financial abuse, how to seek emotional damages, how to protect the home from being leveraged by anyone but me. I told her I didn't want a spectacle. I didn't want to hurt Travis, but I also didn't want to be hurt anymore. She looked me square in the eye and said, "Then let's make sure you never are again." That night, I slept with a strange sense of peace, not because everything was fixed, but because for once, I was moving. Not floating in someone else's tide, not drowning in guilt or fear, moving forward. I didn't change anything about how I acted with Travis. Not yet. When he texted, I responded politely. When he didn't, I didn't chase him. I didn't give him a reason to suspect anything was different. But behind the scenes, I was building. I opened a separate savings account. I moved small amounts over weekly. I called my insurance company and changed the emergency contact information. I updated my will. I listed Jacob's old friend, a retired banker named Harold, as the executor instead of Travis. I also installed a security camera above the front door, not because I was afraid, but because it felt like a boundary, a line. A statement, even if unspoken. This house is mine. Miriam helped me draft a letter of intent to pursue legal action. It wasn't filed yet, but it was ready. Typed, signed, and tucked into a new folder in my desk drawer. One morning, I stood in the doorway of the guest bedroom. Travis's old room. The posters were gone. The bedding was new. But the memories still lived there. I thought of all the times I had sat on the edge of that bed, rubbing his back after nightmares, or listening to him talk about school crushes, dreams, and fears, and I realized something. I didn't owe him silence anymore. He had built his comfort on the back of my exhaustion, and I had allowed it. But that was over now. I started reading more about emotional boundaries, adult-child dynamics, and financial manipulation. I joined an online forum of older women going through similar things. Mothers who had poured themselves dry and were now learning how to rebuild. We weren't bitter. We were awake. And more than anything, we were done. It was during one of those late-night forum sessions that I typed something I hadn't said out loud yet. I am preparing to hold my son accountable. No one argued. No one judged. One woman simply replied, "Quiet strength is still strength." That stuck with me. So I kept preparing, quietly. Deliberately. I wasn't waiting for permission anymore, and I didn't need his approval. The woman I used to be, patient, kind, and endlessly forgiving, she was still here. But now, she had a spine, and she was finally using it. At first, the changes were small, subtle enough that Travis probably didn't notice them, or maybe he did, and just didn't understand what they meant. When he came by to borrow the ladder one Saturday, I didn't rush to greet him at the door like I used to. I didn't offer coffee or ask about his week. I simply pointed to the garage, handed him the key, and went back to folding laundry. He stood there for a second, almost confused, like he expected more, but I didn't give it. That same week, he texted me asking if I could co-sign on a new car loan. His old one had finally broken down, and he wanted something decent. His words, not mine. I stared at the message for a while, then typed one word: no. He replied almost immediately. What? Why not? I didn't answer. I didn't owe him a justification. I simply put my phone down and continued weeding the garden. That was the moment I felt it. Something internal, solid and unmistakable. Power. Not the aggressive, chest-pounding kind, not control over another person, just the simple, steady power of a woman who is no longer willing to shrink. In the days that followed, Travis began acting differently. At first, he called more often, checked in, asked how I was doing, but it didn't feel sincere. It felt strategic. When I told him I was thinking about traveling alone for the first time in years, maybe renting a little cottage up north for a few weeks, he laughed nervously. By yourself? He asked. Is that even safe? I smiled and said, it's safe for someone who's done everything on her own for decades. He didn't know how to respond. Travis had built his comfort on the assumption that I would always be there, waiting in the background, ready to support him no matter how little I got in return. He had gotten used to the version of me that said yes without thinking, who gave without asking, who stayed quiet when I should have spoken. But that woman had gone quiet in a new way now, a powerful way. The next shift came when he showed up unannounced one afternoon, holding a bag of takeout and wearing his old charming grin. I figured we could eat together, he said, like old times. I stepped aside, let him in, and said, you can eat, but I already had lunch. He blinked, taken aback. As he opened the containers and set the table, he started talking about money. How work had been slow, how rent had gone up, how hard it was to get ahead. His tone was casual, but I could feel the ask hanging in the air before it ever arrived. Then came the line I had heard a dozen times before. I just need a little help until next month. But this time, I didn't offer sympathy. I didn't sigh or feel guilt coil in my stomach. I stood up, walked to the drawer, and returned with the envelope I had prepared weeks ago. I handed it to him without a word. He looked down at it, then back up at me. What's this? My terms, I said simply. Everything I've given you, everything you owe, my expectations moving forward. He opened it, skimmed a few pages, and his face darkened. You're being serious? I am, I said, dead serious. For a moment, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Uncertainty. Not the smug confidence he wore so often when he thought I wouldn't push back. This was different. He didn't know what to do with me, and I realized that was because I wasn't predictable anymore. He left not long after, the food untouched. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched the wind move through the trees. I didn't cry. I didn't second-guess myself, because I wasn't reacting anymore. I was choosing. Every quiet boundary, every unanswered message, every polite but firm no. They were all bricks in the wall I was building. Not to keep love out, but to protect whatever parts of me I still had left. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the one being abandoned. I felt like the one walking away, with purpose. It happened on a Tuesday evening, almost 2 months after the fall. The sun was just starting to slip behind the trees, casting long orange streaks across the living room floor. I had just finished wiping down the kitchen counters when I heard the knock. 3 slow taps, not hurried, not angry, just expectant. I opened the door and found Travis standing there with his hands in his pockets. He looked tired, his eyes slightly sunken, his jaw tense. But that same familiar arrogance sat just under his skin, like a suit he'd forgotten to take off. Can we talk? He asked. I stepped aside. If you want to say something, say it. He walked in, glancing around like he expected someone else to be here, like maybe I'd called a lawyer to sit in the corner or a friend to witness what was coming. But there was only me, and that was all I needed. I read through everything, he said, dropping the envelope of documents onto the kitchen table like it was some unwanted package. The lawsuit, the breakdown of everything you think I owe you. Is this real? I didn't move. Yes, you're suing your own son. I folded my arms across my chest. I'm holding a man accountable for years of financial manipulation, emotional harm, and neglect. That he happens to be my son doesn't change the facts. He scoffed and shook his head, running a hand through his hair. I mean, come on, Mom. What do you want from me? An apology? Is that it? No, I said quietly. It's not. Then what? He snapped. You want to humiliate me? I walked around the table slowly and stood across from him. Steady, calm. No, Travis. I want you to understand that what you did, what you've been doing, isn't just selfish. It's wrong. You laughed at me when I was hurt. You used my money when you didn't need it. You disappeared when I needed help. And all the while, you acted like I owed you something just for being alive. He opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. I'm not here to debate. This isn't a conversation. It's a reckoning. His face turned red. So that's it. You're just cutting me off? I nodded. Financially, yes. Emotionally, I'm reclaiming my space, my time, my energy. I've given everything I had to you, Travis. More than you ever saw. And I did it because I love you. But love without boundaries isn't love. It's self-destruction. He looked down at the floor, jaw tight. I needed help, he muttered. You always used to help me. I used to believe that helping you meant saving you, I said. Now I know it just delayed the moment you'd have to face yourself. He sat down in the chair and buried his face in his hands. For a moment, the air between us softened, and I saw a flicker of the boy he used to be. The one who scraped his knee and cried into my shoulder. The one who called me his hero. But I didn't move. Because this moment wasn't about going backward. It was about reclaiming what I had lost while raising him to be a man who never truly grew up. I'm not doing this to hurt you, I said gently, but I won't let you keep hurting me either. He looked up at me, eyes wet. I didn't know you felt this way. No, I said, you didn't bother to ask. The silence between us was deep, not bitter, just full of all the words we hadn't said for years. Finally, he stood up and nodded slowly. I guess I needed to hear this. You did? And now what? He asked. What happens next? I took a breath. What happens next is up to you. The lawsuit is real. If you want to settle privately, we can. If not, I'll follow through. Either way, I won't live in fear or guilt anymore. He picked up the envelope and walked to the door. I'll be in touch, he said. I hope so, I replied. But not because you need something, because you want to be better. He didn't answer, but he paused at the door, just long enough for me to believe that something had shifted. Not everything, not enough, but something. It took exactly 19 days. 19 days from the moment Travis walked out my door, envelope in hand, ego bruised, eyes wet, to the day I received the call that finalized everything. Miriam, my attorney, didn't mince words. He's agreed to settle, she said. No court, no fight. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. He's agreeing to the repayment plan, she continued, including reimbursement for all prior unreturned loans, plus a written statement acknowledging financial and emotional harm. My fingers trembled slightly as I held the phone. And the apology? He's written it, signed it. I'll email you a copy to approve before we file it with the agreement. When I hung up, I stood in the middle of the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly louder than it had ever sounded. I looked around the room, the place where I had fed him, comforted him, worried about him, and mourned the boy I had raised, and then I laughed. A small, startled laugh. Because for the first time in years, I had held the line, and it worked. I checked my email, opened the attachment Miriam sent, and there it was. On a plain white document in Travis's handwriting was a paragraph that might not mean anything to a stranger. But to me, it was a quiet thunderclap. I acknowledge that over the course of several years, I have taken financial advantage of my mother, Lorraine Maddox. I also recognize that my behavior caused her emotional distress and that I failed to offer the care, respect, and gratitude she deserved. I offer this statement not under duress, but as a recognition of my wrongdoing and as a first step toward rebuilding what I have damaged. It wasn't poetic, it wasn't warm, but it was honest. And more importantly, It was legally binding. Travis also agreed to begin a structured repayment plan drafted by Miriam. Nothing astronomical, nothing cruel, just enough to acknowledge the debt and shift the balance of power, enough to remind him, and me, that I was no longer a silent participant in my own mistreatment. But that wasn't the real justice. That came later. A few days after the settlement was finalized, I received another email, this time not from Miriam but from Harold, Jacob's old friend, the one I had named as executor of my estate. "Paperwork received," his message read. Travis's inheritance now held in trust with strict conditions. No direct access. Dispersal dependent on maturity milestones. That had been my final decision. I wasn't cutting Travis off completely. I didn't need to punish him forever, but I was removing the illusion of entitlement. Jacob's life insurance, our home, my retirement savings. All of it had been adjusted. Travis would no longer receive anything just because he carried our last name. He would have to earn it. The twist, the final justice, wasn't in watching him squirm or forcing him to repay me. It was in reclaiming my legacy, in putting my foot down not out of anger, but out of love for myself. Love that had been ignored, exploited, used up, and now finally protected. Later that week, Travis sent a text. "I got the documents. I signed. I'll start the payments next month. I know it doesn't fix everything. Just wanted you to know I get it now." I didn't respond right away. I went out onto the back porch instead. The air was crisp, the sky streaked with soft purples and golds. I sat in my old wooden rocking chair and wrapped a shawl around my shoulders. I thought about Jacob, what he'd say if he were here. Maybe he would have told me this day would come, that the boy we raised would have to face the man he became, that I would, one day, draw a line and be better for it. I smiled to myself, not because everything was perfect, but because I was no longer pretending it had to be. Justice didn't arrive with courtroom drama or angry outbursts. It came quietly, in the form of signed papers, a revoked key, a rewritten will, and a woman, once overlooked, who had finally stood all the way up. It was a Sunday afternoon when Travis came back. I had just returned from the farmer's market, arms full of fresh herbs and peaches. The house smelled like rosemary and sunlight. I was humming to myself in the kitchen, slicing vegetables, when I heard the doorbell ring. For a moment I froze. I knew it was him. There's a kind of recognition that lives in your bones when it comes to your child, even when that child has grown into someone unrecognizable. I dried my hands slowly, walked to the front door, and opened it. Travis stood there, holding a bouquet of sunflowers, my favorite, though I was sure he didn't remember that on his own. His eyes looked tired, but his posture was different this time, less entitled, less certain. He cleared his throat. "Hi, Mom." I nodded but didn't step aside. "Hi." He glanced down, then held the flowers out. "These are for you." I took them. "Thank you." Awkward silence hung in the space between us. "Can I come in?" he asked. I paused for a beat longer than necessary, not to punish him, just to make sure I was inviting him in because I wanted to, not because I felt obligated to. Then I stepped back. For a little while. He walked in slowly, like a guest, not like someone who used to live here. He looked around as if seeing the house for the first time. The small changes I'd made, the absence of his photos in the front hall, the space I had reclaimed. "I like what you've done with the place," he said. "Thank you." I led him to the kitchen table and poured 2 glasses of iced tea. We sat across from each other in the sunlight. He didn't launch into apologies right away. He didn't talk about money or paperwork or the lawsuit. He just sat, fidgeting with his glass until finally he said, "I've been going to therapy." That caught me off guard. He looked up at me. "I thought it would be court-ordered, but it wasn't. After signing everything, I started feeling awful. About what I did, about what I said, about how I made you feel." I said nothing, just waited. He continued. "The therapist said I've got some things to unpack. Control issues, entitlement, emotional immaturity. I used to think I was doing fine, that I was just independent, but I wasn't independent. I was selfish." His voice cracked a little. And for the first time in a long time, he looked like someone I recognized. Not the manipulative man who laughed when I fell, but the boy who used to whisper, "I love you," into my shoulder during thunderstorms. "I don't expect you to forget any of it," he said. "And I'm not here to fix everything in one conversation. I needed you to know I'm trying." I sipped my tea. Let his words sit between us. I didn't rush to respond. That version of me, the one who leapt to make him comfortable, to smooth things over, she didn't live here anymore. When I finally spoke, I said, "Trying is good." He looked surprised. "That's it?" I nodded. "I don't need big speeches. I don't need promises. I've stopped looking for validation, Travis. What I care about now is consistency, growth. If you're serious, you'll keep showing up, for yourself more than for me." He exhaled, the tension in his shoulders loosening just a little. "I'd like to come by again, if that's okay." "Maybe," I said, smiling faintly. "Not every Sunday, not yet, but maybe." He reached across the table, not to take my hand, just to place his palm flat against the wood. A quiet offering. "I'm sorry," he said, "for everything." "I know," I replied, "and I accept your apology, but I don't need it to heal." He nodded, slowly understanding. Because this time I wasn't welcoming him out of guilt or fear or habit. I was doing it because I could, because I had built a life strong enough to say yes or no on my own terms. When he left, I stood at the doorway again, watched him walk down the path. I didn't cry. I didn't hope for anything, but I felt peaceful, like someone who had walked through fire, made it to the other side, and realized she wasn't burned. She was forged. It's strange, the things you notice when the noise finally dies down. The soft creak of the floorboards under your feet, the sound of the wind slipping through the trees, the steady rhythm of your own breath, calm, unhurried. That's what my life feels like now. Quiet, but not empty. I wake up early most days, not because I have to, but because I want to. The light that comes through my curtains in the morning is no different than it was before, but it feels new, softer, like it's touching the face of someone who finally remembers who she is. I start my mornings with small rituals: warm tea instead of rushed coffee, a walk through my garden instead of checking my phone for messages that rarely came. I kneel by the rosemary bush that's grown thick and fragrant, and I press my fingers into the dirt, not to escape anything, but to remind myself I'm still rooted, still here. People ask if things with Travis are better now. The truth? I don't think about it in those terms anymore. Better, worse, fixed, broken. We've spoken a few more times since he came over. He sends updates sometimes, short messages about therapy, work, thoughts he's been wrestling with. I read them. I respond when I feel like it, not out of spite, not out of anger, just clarity. I don't need to mother him anymore. That part of my life is finished. What I have now isn't about repairing the past, it's about protecting the future. My future. I went back to the bookstore last week. Camille greeted me like I was an old friend, which I suppose I am now. I bought 2 novels and 1 little journal. It's blue, leather-bound, and fits in my handbag. I write in it every evening. Not long entries, just a few lines. Some days it's something simple like, "The tomatoes finally ripened." Other days it's heavier. I realize today how long I lived in silence. And then there are days I write only 1 sentence. But I write it again and again until it sinks deep into my marrow. I am allowed to be at peace. That peace didn't come from revenge. It didn't come from Travis finally recognizing what he did. It didn't even come from the legal settlement. Though yes, I admit there was a quiet satisfaction in that too. No, the peace came from reclaiming the one relationship I had neglected the most, the one I had with myself. For years, I put myself second, third, last. I measured my worth by how useful I was to others, especially my son. I wore sacrifice like a badge of honor, and I let that role consume me. But not anymore. Now when I look in the mirror, I don't just see the wrinkles or the silver in my hair. I see strength. I see survival. I see a woman who was underestimated by the world, by her child, even by herself, but who rose anyway. One morning, not long ago, I walked past the staircase, the one I fell down all those weeks ago. I paused there, ran my fingers along the banister, and remembered that moment. The pain, the laughter that followed, the shame that flooded me. But this time, I didn't flinch, because I no longer live in that moment. I live in this one, and in this moment, I am whole. I've started hosting a small dinner group at my house. 3 women from church, 1 from the bookstore, and a neighbor I used to only wave at from across the fence. We take turns cooking and talking about everything from faith to friendship to the strange, beautiful freedom of growing older. They don't know the full story of what happened with Travis, but they know enough to understand that I'm not the same woman I was before. One of them, Elaine, hugged me last week as she left and said, "You've got a fire in you, Lorraine. I hope you know that." I smiled. Because I do know it now. It was there all along. It just took a fall, a silence, and a storm to find it again. And now that I have it back, this strength, this voice, this self, I won't let it go. Not for anyone, not even for him.